good morning, and welcome. Good morning and welcome. Good morning and welcome. Glad to see that everybody is able to come on. Thank you. Welcome Yvette, welcome Angel. Thank you all for being here. I don't believe that we're going to be very long today. But today is Wisdom Wednesday, and as I was trying to decide what book we were going to look at and talk about today, I came across one of my very powerful devotional books, and she actually has a series of them, and her name is Lori Beth Jones. Good morning, how are you? I'm great. And this is the book that I'm going to be looking at today, Jesus in Blue Jeans, a practical guide to everyday spirituality. Good morning. Good morning. So as I said, we're not going to be long today. I'm going to read two passages out of here, and then she's got some really good questions that I kind of want to look at today. So one of her books, this is Jesus in Blue Jeans. It's also a series. She also has one entitled Jesus the CEO. And I have that one as well. But I like Jesus in Blue Jeans because it kind of talks about things that Jesus did in his everyday life, his everyday walk. And the one concerning Jesus the CEO kind of talks about the business side, business principles that you can learn from the life of Christ. And so we're going to dig into this today. I'm not sure if you all have been keeping up with what's happening in our news today, but feel free to go to our Facebook page, Daring Dialogue, and you'll be able to catch up on some of the latest things happening across the country. There's also some Black History Month highlights there that we're going to take a look at tomorrow. Just some things in Black history that will interest you for our Thinking Thursday. But also there's plenty of news updates in regards to the nominations that are happening, that are being voted on this week. And there's a really interesting piece about whether or not our president is literate. And I've kind of wondered about his literacy based on the speeches that I've heard and the speeches that I've read, and why he's keeping most of his communication at a 5th grade level. But this particular piece on our page actually delves into it a little bit deeper with footage in various different places that are kind of piecing together to figure out whether or not our leader of the free world is actually literate. And it could actually explain why he is not reading things before he signs them. I know there was a article that came out talking about the fact that he had not read many of the executive orders that he is signing, and so he was not even aware that he had signed Steve Bannon to the National Security Council. It was not until afterwards that he realized that he had signed him, which is a very problematic and dangerous thing, that you are signing executive orders that you're not reading and that you're not aware of what you are signing. Angel, see if you can come back, go out and come back in, because from my end, nothing is freezing. Is it better? All right. So, wonderful. Let's get into Jesus in Blue Jeans. One of the topics here that we're going to cover today is the fact that Jesus shaped the invisible. Jesus shaped the invisible. And I'll read it for you. She says, Jesus did shape the invisible with his faith. And he told us that our gift, and that was our gift and responsibility as well. If you ask for anything in my name, I will do it. John 14:14. So often we emphasize the pray to get things aspect of the power, that it is diminished to the level of having our basic needs or desires met. But prayer and faith are actually the shaping power of the future. That's a very good thing if you want to write that down today. Prayer and faith are actually the shaping power of the future. I know many times people look at prayer and they think, does prayer really work? Does prayer really matter? And I know in my own life, I have seen the power of prayer. As one of the songs said, when nothing else could help, I tend to not go to prayer as a last resort. I tend to go to prayer as a first resort. And so I actually believe what she just said here. Prayer and faith are actually the shaping power of the future. In my region, we have lots of things happening in terms of the Confederacy. I'm in a region where the Confederacy is highly celebrated. We still have active Klansmen in our region, stuff like that. And so a large part of what we do is we go out and we pray at different places, and we ask God to pull down the idols, pull down the idolatry of generational worship. I know a lot of people think that ancestor worship is just the African kind, but there's a lot of ancestor worship centered around the Confederacy, around the soldiers and all of that, around the battles, around the battlefields. There's a lot of ancestry worship tied to that. So what we have chosen to do is we have chosen to go and pray at some of these places, at some of these sites. And we've asked God to begin to remove these structures, remove these idols out of our region. Well, yesterday, I found an article that was literally talking about that exact thing, that people in our region had voted to remove this huge statue that sits in one of the town squares that represents Robert E. Lee. And if you know anything about Robert E. Lee, that's huge in terms of Confederacy icons and heroes and all of that kind of stuff. Now, some people are upset about it, but my thing is that's an answered prayer for us, because we've been asking God to literally physically remove these symbols of celebration of slavery, celebration of racism. And of course, there were people that were like, well, this is a part of history. Should it really be removed? Shouldn't we keep it up there? I'm like, but why are we keeping it up there? What are we really celebrating? You're celebrating a failed coup of the United States, right? You're celebrating, you want to celebrate the fact that people were defeated for wanting to keep the institution, the peculiar institution, as they call it, of slavery alive. So what are you actually celebrating? Right. It's a symbol of hate for people who are still alive and well in this country, whose ancestors endured through that time. So yeah, we're excited that it is being torn down. If you're just coming in, we're reading from Jesus in Blue Jeans, A Practical Guide to Everyday Spirituality. And this is called He Shaped the Invisible. She says, I know many cases of parents who committed prayers to their passion and created the child they long for. My friend recalls when her daughter was born. She awoke still groggy from the anesthesia and was momentarily alone in her room. She suddenly saw an angel standing at the foot of her bed who smiled and said, you have a little girl, and she will have long curly brown hair just as you requested. When they brought in the baby with a crop of curly brownish hair covering her crown, she wept with delight. She knew her prayers had helped to shape the invisible. Newsweek magazine recently reported even quantum mechanics, the study of subatomic interactions, offers evidence that the world does not come into being until a mind interacts with it. Now that's powerful. Science has evidence that the world does not come into being until a mind interacts with it. Eminent physicist John Wheeler of Princeton University refers to us living in an observer-created universe. Bizarre though it seems, for instance, measuring the spin of one subatomic particle forces a twin particle miles away to have the opposite spin. The observer literally creates reality, much as Eastern and other holistic faiths teach. And this was in a Newsweek article, November of '94. Research in quantum physics has discovered particles that take on properties proportionate to the expectations of the people watching them. Perhaps these are the creative particles hovering in the universe, which are merely awaiting our clear commands. God said, "Light be," and light was, Genesis 1 and 3. When our founding fathers met in Philadelphia, they declared that their purpose was to create a more perfect union. Then they went on to describe what the core elements and rights would be in this more perfect union, such as the right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. Now, let me put a plug there, because most people don't realize in the original text, it did not say happiness. It said they had a right to pursue life, liberty, and property. So they were actually referring to the right to pursue this peculiar institution of owning other human beings. But you probably won't learn that in your history book. So they went on to describe in detail the belief that in their union, every citizen would have the right to bear arms and be guaranteed other freedoms, such as freedom of the press. Yes, freedom of the press and separation of church and state. The visionaries who met in a single room with their prayers and their pens began to shape the invisible, creating the framework that supports what is considered the most successful form of government now known. They did not have a role model to look at as they wrote their words. They had only their faith and their imagination. These people truly shaped the invisible. Now you can see a little bit of her Americanism and her patriotism coming out in her devotional, right? Because they did not just shape our documents out of nowhere, right? The framers of our Constitution actually did look at things like the Federation, the Federalist Papers. They actually did look at how Britain's government was already formed. So they weren't completely shaping something out of nothing, but we do get what she's saying. In the book of wisdom, we are told that wisdom makes choice of the works God is to do. Clearly, we too are given the option to help direct the works of the Lord. When Jesus told the little girl to wake up, or Lazarus to come out of the tomb, or the cripple to rise up off of his pallet and walk, he was altering their future, viewing it not as a destiny carved in stone, but one filled with new possibility and hope. He was changing each person's previously perceived destiny. Jesus shaped the invisible. And then she has a question here. What tools are you using to shape the invisible? What tools are you using to shape the invisible? Well, of course, we know that we have the tool of prayer, but we also have the tool of obedience, right? When God tells us to do something, we do it and we move in faith, and that in turn shapes what's going to happen in our future. I think about the fact of, imagine with King Saul, for those of you who are familiar with the Word of God, imagine King Saul and how different the kingdom would have been had Saul simply waited for Samuel to show up and offer to the Lord an offering. That's all he had to do. He could have shaped his destiny by simply waiting on the prophet to get there. But instead, rather than wait on the prophet to get there, what does he decide to do? He decides to take matters into his own hand, and he decides to step out of the role of appointed king for the people and step into the role of priest and prophet. And that was where he went wrong. So there's all kinds of ways that we can shape the invisible. The main two ways that I see working in my life right now is through prayer and through obedience. the last section here that we're going to look at today. She says, Jesus knew that success is cumulative. Jesus knew that success is cumulative. Now, most people don't think that success is cumulative. We have some people that think that success is the end game. But if you are awake, if you're alive, if you're doing everything that God told you to do in this moment, in this period of time in your life, then guess what? You're operating in success. Because there's many people that are still not doing what God told them to do 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 30 days ago, yesterday. So if you are being consistently obedient, right, in the place and the things in which God has called you to do, then you are successful. I know some people don't look at it that way. They think, wait until I get to the end game, or wait until I get my degree, or wait until I get married and then I'll be successful. No. If you're doing what God has told you to do right now, right in this moment, then you are successful. And sometimes we don't celebrate. Yeah, and it's consistency. And sometimes we don't celebrate our current success because we're so busy looking too far ahead into what we call our future success, or that culminating thing. But like she's saying here, Jesus knew that success was cumulative. So me, I'm a person that I celebrate every step of my successes. Every small success I get in life, I celebrate it. You know, if I finish writing a book, I celebrate it. I start on the next book with the first 2 or 3 chapters, I celebrate it. I'm able to, get all of my goals met for the day. I celebrate it. For me, celebration is simply a good cup of coffee. Sometimes it's a scoop of mint chocolate ice cream. It doesn't have to be, this big, huge thing. But you need to learn how, and you need to develop the practice, if you're not already doing it, of celebrating your small successes. If you're working on graduating from a program, or graduating from, college or a technical program, if you're completing your coursework and your goal is to make at least a B in your coursework, and you're making a B or you're making an A, celebrate that success, And yes, it will help you to feel less overwhelmed because you're taking time to celebrate your small incremental successes. A lot of times people are not going to be there to celebrate your small successes. Some people only show up at the end, right? Some people only show up at the graduation party or the graduation day. They don't see those small incremental steps that you're taking towards a larger goal. So it's always good to celebrate your small successes. All right. So this is what she has to say here. I read recently that during a typical rainfall, a single acre of land will receive 5 million raindrops in 1 hour's time. 5 million raindrops in 1 hour's time on 1 acre of land. With this in mind, one comes to realize that no single raindrop carries more weight than any other. The first stroke in the pool is as significant as the final one that leads to the victory stand at the Olympics. Yet, so many of us subconsciously believe that success will happen overnight, that we can start swimming 1 week and be an Olympic champion the next. God knows that success is cumulative. Had Jesus not believed that his work would outlast him, he would have been in despair on the cross, considering himself at that point in history and time to be a failure. Instead, he was able to say, "It is finished." He knew that success was cumulative. All of his deeds had added up to success. I love watching small drops of water on a window pane merge with others in that unique combination of chemistry and gravity that turns one drop of water into a rivulet, then a stream.